Hello. So I'm gonna do an attempt here on showing you how I did the fuel system for an 8-year-old project I mess around with in RPG Maker VX Ace. So I have the original files here, and it is event-based. It works on its own without scripts, but in this specific project, I wanted to use a car. I wanted it to be like a car, and that's why it also has a fuel system. So, in order to drive a car around on land in RPG Maker VX Ace, you're going to need a script to do that. But it's plug and play, so it's very simple. I will show you how. First, let's just see what happens if you just put down a boat here. Yeah. So I have imported the graphics for the vehicle sprites here in this test project that I have. And if we now go in and try and drive this car around, you will see that you can't really do that unless I hold down control, of course, which is the debug for no clip. So we need that script in this project, and I have it right here. I will find a place where you can download it for your project and put the link to it in the description. I hope it's still out there, but I will find it. It's made by William Couliard, and also thanks to Gal here. It's plug and play, but there are some settings you can change if you want. You can set the vehicle speed to higher if you want the car to move faster. You can also decide what kind of events the player can trigger while in the vehicle, which is pretty neat. Like you can have special things happen when you are driving around in the vehicle. So first, let's just paste in the script here. And that's it for that part. Now we can drive the car around on land. Ooh. We can also do a test for water here. Shouldn't be able to drive on water, right? So we can check if that's true. So you can see I can't drive on the water. So the player right now can drive this car around forever, and we don't really want that. We want it to only drive around when you have fuel, and since fuel is not something that is in the part of the engine, we have to make something to track it. And fuel is tracked by a variable. And recommend that you know what variables are and switches, so that you understand what you're doing here. But if not, I will still try to explain it. So essentially, we are going to need to have a minimum of 2 events on the map that we want the player to be able to drive this car on. But I'll make 3 events because I will want to add the gap window to this as well. The first event is, or all events are going to be parallel processes. This basically means that they are running in the background. And you have to be careful with these events because if you do some kind of specific event commands, you can lock up your game, just like auto run events can do. We're going to add an event command here. We're going to check for something. We want to check for the fuel. We want to check if the player has fuel. That's the first step here. And to do that, we use a conditional branch. And I have made a variable called fuel. It's just named fuel. And we want to check if we have at least 1 fuel or more. So greater than or equal to 1. A variable, it stores numbers for you. That's basically all it does. So our fuel is going to be counted through a variable. And if you want the player to be able to check their fuel without being in the vehicle, basically up to you. I don't know. I don't know the amount of fuel I have in my car right now in real life. I have to go out in the car and see it. So I think it makes sense to just let it only be shown when you actually are in the vehicle. And now this parallel process event will do something whenever our fuel is greater than 1 or equals to 1. But of course, we also want it to check if the player is actually driving the car. And that you can luckily do here. You can check if the player is driving the boat. And that's pretty much it for the checks. We now need to make things happen. So, what do we want to do when the player does not have enough fuel and is driving the boat? So we go into else here. We're gonna just put in a text there, no fuel. And we want to force the player out of the vehicle. So now, if we enter the vehicle, we will get thrown right out. So let's just save and test this. The game shouldn't lock up either, as you can see. If we go into the vehicle now. Alright, I made a mistake. Yeah, of course. Let's just delete this. So we need to first check that the player is actually driving the vehicle before we check the fuel. That's the right logic here. So let's do that first, and then we can check for the fuel. Right? We want the fuel to be checked once the player is actually driving a car. And the variable is there and there. Okay, cool. Now, no fuel. We can just do this as well. That. And force the player out of the vehicle. And now we can do things. So, this next part, we want the player to lose fuel when it is in the vehicle. And we do that by decreasing the variable, but we want it to happen after a while. Now we could use a timer for this. We could also use another event, which enables and just waits and then decreases the variables, I think. But I'm just going to replicate whatever I did in my project, because I know that works. So we use the timer here, and every 4 seconds I want the fuel to decrease by 1. And we also need to add a switch here that I'll just name drive check, so we can let the game know if the player is driving or not, and whenever or not it should decrease their fuel. So now we make a new event page, which is enabled once the drive check switch is on. So whenever the boat is driven and the variable is equal to 1 or greater, a timer at 4 seconds starts, and it turns on the drive check switch, which then in turn makes this event page function. And it is also a parallel process, and I need to cheat here and look about this. Okay, so I made a conditional branch to check for the time, and if that's not the case, it simply turns off this stuff. Okay, so here we want to check for the timer, and we want to check for when it's 0 minutes and 0 seconds left or less. So now we are making something that decides what happens when the timer reaches 0. And what happens then is that we decrease our variable for fuel by 1. And we want the timer to start again. So we need to stop it And we also need to turn off the drive check switch so that the event switches back to this process, which will then start the clock again and enable the drive check, which starts the countdown and basically checks if time has reached 0 and then decreases your fuel. And yeah, if the timer is not 0, let's see what I did there for next. Yeah, if the fuel is less than or equal to 0, it will turn off the drive check. It will turn off this event. Because we want it to always go back to this page whenever the player runs out of fuel, and we don't want it to just continue decreasing fuel below 0, so it becomes a negative variable, because that will look weird. You can't really drive a car if you have -1 fuel. You can't even start it. I don't think it's possible to have -1 fuel in a car. So yeah. Yeah, that should be it. And then we have the second event, which is a simple, what do we call it? The purpose of this one is to make the stopping of the timer more immediate. Like the second you exit the vehicle, the timer gets stopped, so the player doesn't waste fuel because the game doesn't stop the timer in time. So we can see what happens. Well, yeah, now you get thrown out of the vehicle because you don't have fuel. So to test this, we need an event that gives us some fuel there. So let's just put down this character here. And fuel, let's add 20 fuel. So now we can have fuel from this NPC here, and now we can drive the vehicle, and you see here that the timer counts down in the corner. We don't want that to show because it looks a bit weird. You can edit the script here. Let's see, sprite timer, and you can comment out this line here and just type false here, and it will disable the visibility of the timer. Just gonna check if that is correct. Yes, as you can see, we no longer see the timer. But we need to show what how much fuel the player has left. And also, as I mentioned, we want the timer to stop when the player is exiting the vehicle. So I'm just gonna copy this event over here. So it is enabled when the drive check switch is on. And it's of course a parallel process, so it runs all the time. And it's a simple conditional branch that checks if the player is driving the boat. And if it is driving the boat, nothing further happens for this event. But if it's no longer driving the boat, it stops the timer and it disables the drive check switch, which means it disables this event and this event page, and it goes back to this, which constantly checks if the player is driving in the vehicle. And that's it. Once you have this in place now, the fuel system should work. But if you want to display the amount of gas that the player have left while you're driving the vehicle, you can use something called the gab window script by Janfly. It is very straightforward, but it requires you to do some write a short script in the events for the window to basically call it or show it. I can show you a quick example. So here in the description, it explains the script calls, what you need, what commands you need to write to do this. So you can do it like this, gab and string. So you just create an event, right? And you put in a script in the event and you just write it like this, gab, and then you like gas left and //v, and we have used variable 1 for this. liters or something like that. And that's it. Since it's a string, you need these guys there. But we want to also show the car icon, so I'm going to use the string and actor ID. And we're going to have a parallel process. And this event, we want it to only be enabled when the player is driving. So we have it enabled when the drive check switch is on. Next, we need to add a script, gab, gas left, /v and 1 to show variable 1, liters. And we want actor 11 to be used for the icon of the window. So we need to create actor number 11 here. And we want to decide its graphics to be the car. Just name it car, or do not modify or something else. So you remember not to change it. Unless you know. So we have a problem now. Let's just enter the vehicle. So as you can see here, it shows and it disappears. It doesn't really update. So we're gonna make it do that right now. We're gonna have a slight delay by putting in a wait of 15 frames. And then we want it to clear the gap window. So let's see if there's a comment for that. There we go, clear gap. That's the script call we need to make here. Clear gap. And now every 15 frames, the script gab gas left will show the liters will show up. And it will also clear it afterwards. And right after it has cleared it, it will show it again. So it will like be updated very often. You can increase the wait timer if you want. Now, as you can see, we are losing gas. So let's see what happens when the gas reaches 0 to see if we did this correctly. We should get thrown out of the vehicle because of the event that constantly checks if the player is driving. And when the player is not driving and the gas is 0 or less, we should get thrown out of the vehicle. That's the gist of it. So hopefully, just gonna wait through this. No fuel. And you see the gap window also disappeared because the switch is now turned off. And there we are. We are now thrown out of the vehicle. We enter it again. There's no fuel, can't drive it. We need to have fuel. So yeah, the fuel variable, it needs to have a number in it now. It needs to be something else than 0. It needs to be greater than 1 or 1. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So remember to have these 3 events on every map that you want this car to be drivable on. And a way you can do if you want the different vehicles to have their own fuels, the separate fuels, you need to have basically a set of events and a set of new switches and variables for them specifically. So you need to make one for the ship and one for the airship. Let me know if you have any further questions.